kindly introduce yourself as well before you start.
Okay. Hello everyone. I'm currently a PhD scholar in under Sunanda sir. So, yeah. Okay. So, can you all see the presentation in full screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, today we are going to understand two experiments. So, the first one is the determination of critical heat flux. So, let's talk about a little bit about the concept of it. And yeah, so what we are going to totally understand here is what is the critical heat flux of a nichrome wire which is submerged underwater. So, before going to see the equipment, let's talk a bit about boiling and boiling curve. Now we all know that when heat is added to a liquid from a submerged solid surface, which is at a temperature higher than the saturation temperature of the liquid changes its phase to vapor, and that is called boiling. Now here you can see this is the boiling curve, and it has multiple zones, 4 zones. On the x-axis, you see this is Ts, which is the temperature of the wire in this case, and T saturation is the saturation temperature. And this is the amount of heat which is being extracted from the wire through different heat transfer mechanisms. So we have one nichrome wire underwater, and we are going to see what is the critical heat flux of it. So when you are simply at very low values of delta T, this one, the flux slowly increases, heat flux slowly increases, but the quantity of the flux is rather very small here. So it is essentially governed by natural convection. Okay, so you all know that natural convection is associated with rather low values of heat transfer coefficient. So the amount of heat that is lost from the wire due to natural convection would be small. So boiling starts with natural convection. These are the representative values depending upon which liquid we are using, which solid is in use. So you don't put too much emphasis on these values. We are rather interested in the trend, the boiling curve trend. Now at this point A, when we keep on providing our superheat, at this point A, the first bubble will appear. So there would be nucleation of the first bubble. Now from your basic physics and intuition, you know that bubbles get generated where there is some roughness present, right? So some crevices which are formed because nothing is perfectly smooth. So the wire is not smooth as well. So the roughness will dictate where the bubbles will form. Now the bubbles will form and they will rise to the surface. Let's say this is our wire and we are providing heat. So bubbles will form and they'll rise to the surface and try to reach to the top of the liquid. Now if the superheat is less, this is less, then the bubbles will not reach to the top. They will condense before reaching to the top. So if you keep on increasing this superheat, a point would come when more and more bubbles will be generated and they will move to the top with an associated increase in your heat transfer coefficient. And this region, which we are calling as nucleate boiling region, is where the bubbles rise to the free surface and it's associated with a very large value of heat flux here, this region. But a point would come where number of bubbles that are going to be formed will be so large that the rate of formation of bubbles will be much more than the rate at which they are going to be released from the surface. So the number of bubbles on the surface of the wire will start to increase with time, and as a result of which, as a result of which the entire wire is going to be covered by a large number of bubbles. Here it's not that evident here, but there are a huge number of bubbles that will be flowing to the top, that will be generated and try to reach to the top. So now when such things happen, the bubbles are mostly vapor. So the heat has to go through the vapor, now probably by a conduction process. And then a convection will take place between the vapor inside the bubble and the liquid outside the bubble. So a resistance will be present, right? So due to that resistance in series, there would be a fall, this fall. Now the entire region is going to be filled with a film of vapor, and we're going to be seeing the film boiling from nucleate boiling. We'll discuss about this a little bit later. I'll just leave this portion for the time being, just a bit, and we'll go to the film boiling first. So you have studied in your heat transfer course already, right? The film boiling is associated with a low value of heat transfer coefficient. So you get a very low value of heat transfer coefficient at some point in this film boiling region. So that is definitely lower than what you get in the nucleate boiling, right? So now when you keep on increasing the superheat, even beyond that, in this film boiling region, a point would come where the temperature difference delta T is going to be the order of 10 to the power 3 or so. It will be really large. So the film boiling is going to be associated with radiative heat transfer as well. So radiation starts to take over in this region here, and the rise of this curve will be steeper than what is drawn over here, this curve. So the melting point of the nichrome is roughly around this point E. I will talk when we see the equipment, you will get to understand like what we are doing with the melting of the nichrome wire. So now, if you see the point E, and if you go in this direction, this is roughly similar to the maximum of the critical heat flux value, which you can obtain during boiling when you change from nucleate boiling to film boiling with transition boiling in between. So the evaluation of critical heat flux is extremely important in heat transfer devices because whatever material you use, it will reach up to a point. After that, it cannot sustain that amount of thermal stress, right? So you need to know before using that material in some kind of devices, you need to know what is its critical heat flux. So what you are doing here is that here you are changing your delta T, but like you are increasing your delta T, but instead of getting a higher value of heat transfer, you are progressively getting a lower value of heat transfer. Now, this region of transition boiling is some sort of metastable region. Experimentally, it may not be possible to really always traverse this part and reach to this point, like this point. But many times what you would see in the experiment is that you will directly jump to the point closer to E. It's hard to see this curve usually. So the practical reason for which you are performing this experiment is to know what is your delta T, that corresponds to the maximum or critical heat flux, and what is the value of your critical heat flux. And critical heat flux also depends on the value of the base temperature. You will know about that when we see the equipment again, and that depends on the surrounding temperature. So this is more or less the concept behind our boiling, right? So let's see how we use this physics in our equipment. So here, this is our equipment. I hope you can, there are some things that you can still see. There are some more few figures, maybe that will help. Let's see. So our objective is, as you know by now, study of critical heat flux of a submerged nichrome wire. This is water. So now let's see how the experiment works. So what you can see, there is this thermometer that is dipped into the water, which has some specific characteristics. We'll talk about that a little later. So now it's not clearly visible here, but there is this thin wire inside that is connected within two rods, these two rods. And it should not be too tight or too loose, because if it is too loose, we'll be using the length of this wire. We will be needing that in our calculation of the critical heat flux. So if it is too loose, then this length will not be proper, right? We'll measure more length than that is actually here. So if it is too tight, then the thermal stress along with this mechanical stress might give us incorrect flux value, no? So this has to be not too tight, not too loose. Now there is this big bulk heater. I hope you can see this. You want to heat your water. Okay. So the purpose of that big bulk heater is to raise the temperature of water that is contained within here to some high level, let's say 50 degrees centigrade. So the thermometer essentially tells you the temperature of the liquid when you are using the bulk heater. So you initially switch on your bulk heater and raise the temperature to 50 degrees centigrade, and then you switch off that heater and let it come to some sort of equilibrium by keeping it underwater for 1 minute or so. Then you stir it and you measure the temperature. When the bulk temperature reaches about 50 degrees centigrade, you start your experiment. It can't really reach at perfectly 50 degrees, so you'll have to be careful about that. So after that, you'll start your experiment. Now, how do you do this experiment? So you have the control over here, right? So through this ammeter and voltmeter, which will measure the current flowing through the thin wire, and the ammeter will measure the current flowing and the voltmeter will show the potential across it. So you know at any given point of time how much heat is generating in this thin wire. So you know how much heat input you are giving to the system, and you visually look what is happening. There is a video I'll be showing you. It might give you better understanding on it. So you see bubbles will form on the surface of the wire, then it will go to the free surface, sort like that. So what you do now, that you increase your current from here through the thin wire by small increments, very small increments. So wait for about 30 seconds so that it comes to equilibrium. Since this is a very thin wire, it comes to thermal equilibrium really quickly. So then you increase your current a bit more, and the voltage also progressively changes, but the current change is more pronounced. So with small increments of about say 0.5 ampere or so, you go on keep on increasing the heat input to your wire. So when you cross say 6 or 7 ampere, then you try to go by the lowest division possible. So here the perfect value is 0.2 ampere. So 0.25 ampere works too. So 0.2 or 0.25 ampere, you change it after you reach here because it's too sensitive after that. So wait for about 30 seconds and then see what is the voltage and current at that point of time. And then you go for the next increment. So what you see ultimately is that when you go to a specific voltage and current through that wire, through this wire, the wire will snap, it will break. So that point will give you your critical heat flux. So you'll have your ampere and voltmeter reading, so you know your heat input. So after that breaks, you know your critical heat flux value. So your experiment is quite simple. Increase the bulk temperature first, bulk temperature of water. After the bulk temperature is reached, start passing the voltage and current through the nichrome wire. And it's a nichrome wire, so it has very high resistivity. So it will generate large quantities of heat when current passes through it. So you see the changes and the bubble formation in the vicinity of this wire, and then it snaps, and that is your critical heat flux point. So it's called as burnout point 2. So this phenomenon in this equipment, you can see it as here. After any sort of systems, after it passes this point, it will snap. Okay, so if you know this point, then you sort of know your critical heat flux as well. So you have an idea about how much your material can sustain, how much thermal stress can it sustain. So let's see some more figures of this equipment because it's not that clear too. So this is the top part of it. This is our thermometer. Here this already broke. So yeah, this should be the thin wire, and yes, ammeter and then voltmeter. This variac you'll be using to change this ammeter and voltmeter readings. Like you can change your input. So this the test heater is your wire, and then your bulk heater you'll use it to heat your water. Okay. So yes, this is still you cannot see the wire. It's not that clear, but there is one wire that will nichrome wire. So this is more or less the equipment. Now this is the apparatus. You already know, right? I just explained. There is this cylindrical glass container. The test heater is the wire, and the heater coil is for heating the bulk water. So the heater coil will be directly connected to the heater. You will heat it to say 50 degrees centigrade, and then you change that bulk temperature to and perform your experiments. So the test heater is the wire that will be connected in series, and the voltmeter and the ammeter will provide heat into that. So these are some specifications to your system. So the procedure. So you first take some water. Yeah, we'll talk about distilled water. I hope some of you can tell me why this distilled water should be used. So if not, you can think about it. So yeah, you have to make sure that both heaters will be submerged in it. And then you connect your heater coil and your wire, and then switch on the heater coil, wait for the bulk temperature to reach up to some degrees, and then switch it off, and then start the test heater wire. So very gradually increase it, the ammeter and voltmeter values, and you see how the boiling is happening. So you go on increasing it and the wire breaks. So you change the bulk temperature again and perform the experiments. So this is the value, the wire length, the diameter of the wire, and then the surface area. So you know the heat input, and then you know the surface area. So you can count flux, right? So ammeter and voltmeter readings. At this ammeter and voltmeter reading, you are getting your critical flux point. And this is your base temperature on which you are starting your experiment. So these are different wires, like nichrome wires with different radiuses. So this is more or less, yeah, all you have to do is find out the critical heat flux and plot them as a function of temperature. So yeah, I'm going to show you a video, a small video. Let's see. Here. Can you, no, you won't be able to see, right? 1 second. I'll share the screen again. No, wait. Sorry. Okay. Can you see a video? Can you see one VLC opening?
Yes, ma'am.
So this is where our thin wire. Let's see. So these, when you keep on heating it, these bubbles will form. Yeah, so after this, the video starts again. So they haven't shown how it exactly breaks. So you get the point. So bubbles will form and it will go onto the surface, then vigorously it will form and then it will break. That will be your, what do you say, your critical flux point. So let me share the presentation again. So you all understood this, how this works, right? So, but the thin wire here we can't really see. No matter the situation, we really can't see. So if you have any questions, or we are going to discuss the questions at the end. So I'll go to the next experiment and then we can discuss the questions after that.
If I can say something here,
Yes.
let them ask questions on this experiment if they have any, and then after this is resolved, then we'll move to the next one.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So any questions?
Like I do not get that point.
Okay.
We are having like delta T minus T saturation of water, right?
Yes.
So like, so we should increase like by more 100 plus something the temperature, right?
100 plus something. So you are talking about the bulk, like the bulk initial temperature we are taking.
Yes.
Okay. So here your T is the your wire temperature. So when you set one bulk temperature, that means you are.
May I, if I say
Yes,
something
sir.
to add here, its history, this
Okay.
experiment can be done in various ways in a much more controlled way than has been adapted to be used as a demonstration experiment. So the ideally what we are doing here is we are plotting T of the wire and the T of the surrounding, this delta T. But however, we are not measuring temperature of the wire in this case. This is just a representative curve to show that how the heat flux would behave when you change the delta T. So we do not know what is TW, that it is not measured here, but we know that by increasing the current through the wire, we are increasing this delta T, whatever be the value of delta T. So the gross behavior of the gross effect of the temperature difference on the heat flux as shown by the behavior of it, ultimately the breakage at point C is the objective of the present setup. So we are also not going to see the way we have set up the experiment, the region CD, which is very interesting because you are increasing the delta T, but instead of the heat flux getting increased, it gets decreased. So that is more or less the crux of the experimental setup, which simply says that we, by slowly increasing the temperature difference, which is the potential for heat flow from the wire to the surrounding fluid, the heat flux should follow a path like this. So qualitatively, we would be probably will be able to predict this if we could measure everything correctly. But this delta T, the x-axis here is a big unknown in our case. So what we do is we would rather find out what is this point C where the wire breaks and find out what is the corresponding value of the Q. So we are finding a discrete value of the critical heat flux, and we are trying to see what is going to be its behavior when you change the surrounding temperature. Now you can well imagine that as the surrounding temperature changes, the temperature of the wire has to go to a higher value in order to dissipate the same amount of heat. So if your temperature is 70 degree and you are dissipating 2 watts, 2 watts is just a number, 2 units of heat, then the TW, suppose it has to be 95. But if you increase the temperature of the surrounding fluid by, let's say, another 10 degrees, then the temperature of the wire to dissipate the same amount of heat will have to increase drastically. And it's not a linear function, because the physics that happens on the wire is essentially a phase change from the liquid to the vapor leaving the surface, ensuing turbulence near the wire, and also the vapors may themselves coalesce and form an additional film around the wire, thereby providing additional resistance. So that's why the relation is not linear, and the experiment that we are showing you is not equipped to get all the variations of heat flux with temperature. So what we are getting only is that the change in critical heat flux, the point C, the location of the point C, the y-axis value of point C, when you change the temperature of the wire. That's all we can do in this setup. But your question is valid, is that if we did have a very controlled experiment, and there are papers in the literature where all the values of the temperatures, etc., are properly found, they are calibrated so that you can plot Q versus delta T. The region that is shown by CD, that's essentially a metastable region. So in many situations, you will not get the region CD even in a controlled experiment. You really have to do very careful experiments to capture the region CD. Now, when you go from D to E, the temperature difference necessary to that amount of heat makes the temperature of the wire nearly reaching its melting point, and it snaps. And so the location of E and the location of C, in fact, the location of E, the y-axis value of E, essentially gives you more or less approximate what would be the value of C, which would obviously vary depending on what material you are choosing. So those are the complexities of the experiment, which we are not examining in this specific case. But the critical heat flux evaluation is something which is very important, especially in industries that deal with very high values of heat fluxes. For example, if it's a nuclear reactor and you're using a coolant for reducing the temperature of the core, you need to know what is the critical heat flux for the material, for the cladding material. Because if you are in C, if you have reached C, then even if you increase the delta T, instead of getting a higher value of heat flux, you are going to end up with a lower value of heat flux, which is counterintuitive, but now you know why. And now you know why the value of C is value of the critical heat flux is important, because you are going into a metastable region and you cannot use that for cooling of any crucial components of reactors and so on. So you would like to work in the region B to C, such that you have roughly a linear change in the heat flux with the delta T, and that you can use as your design value. You should never come close to C while designing an equipment. It's a long answer to your question, but I think it clarifies some of the doubts you may have about the critical heat flux and the region C, D, and what delta T is all about.
Yes, sir.
Is it okay? Any other questions? Then we can discuss that as well.
Hello, sir. I had a doubt.
Yes.
So you said that point C, I wanted to ask was, does point C also represents the melting point of nichrome wire, like at that condition?
No, it truly speaking, no, it does not, because C is the point where where there is a change between modes of heat transfer. So from a nucleation point, nucleating situation, you're going to a film boiling situation, and you are also coming to a point where the film is such that it does not allow the heat flux to increase. So definitely at C it will not melt. So you really have to increase the temperature, increase the delta T to some value such that it breaks, which corresponds to E. And now it doesn't have to be, I mean, that E and C are going to be the same. But if you look at the curve, which is there, which has been shown, what you see is that the heat flux values at C and E are approximately equal, nothing else. So that's why where it breaks can be taken, that means the value at point T can be taken roughly what is going to be the value of C. And in any case, you are not going to work in a region close to C. So some variation in C, it really does not matter.
Okay, sir.
But it does not, it never melts at C. It will still be solid.
So the cause of the wire breaking at C is not melting, basically.
As I said, the wire doesn't break at C. Wire breaks at E.
Okay.
We extrapolate that E to C, knowing the relation, knowing the value, the closeness of the values of heat flux between C and E.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any other question?
Sir, if we change the material of the wire, then difference between C and E will change, right?
That is a possibility. Yes, that is definitely a possibility. That it's the boiling curve that you see could look different if you have a different what would I say, different value of this thing, different material. But if you are really using a precise experiment, then in that case you do have to know what's the value of this delta T. So if you plot that Q versus delta T, then a similar curve will result. But in that case, as you have correctly pointed out, the y-axis values of C and D could be different. But looking at the curve, now you know what is your critical heat flux. Did I explain it correctly to you? I mean, did you understand?
Yes, sir.
Since we do not have any knowledge of delta T in this case, in the rather scaled down version of the very critical experiment, the very sensitive experiment, so we have chosen something where C and E are roughly equal. But your point is very well taken that C and E could be different as well. But in that case, you have to have the precise knowledge of the x-axis value. Anything else? I guess if this, you can start the next one then.
Okay. Okay, let's see what's the next experiment is. So yeah, this is the observation table, right? We discussed about it. Did we discuss about it?
Yes, ma'am. We discussed.
Okay. Then this is your experiment, the first experiment. So the second one is your heat transfer in natural convection. So what you are going to see, we will learn here the natural convection, and then we see how the heat transfer coefficient is varying in a vertical cylinder. So what we have here, this is a rod that is enclosed in a box which we can see the inside of all the time. We can see the box inside of it all the time. And these white bands that we see here are the places where the thermocouples are placed to measure the temperature. We have 7 of it, 7 thermocouples, and another thermocouple to measure the ambient temperature. So through the core of the rod runs an electrical heater here, which is supplied with constant power through the variac here. And then what you do here is, first we'll discuss a little about the equipment, then we'll go to the physics of it. So first what we do is switch on the heater and then allow the system to come to a steady state. All the thermocouples temperatures will be same, sorry, not same, steady state as in after one point of time the temperature values will not change. So when that does happen, we find out all these temperatures and we convert the temperature into convective heat transfer coefficients. So another thermocouple, as I said, will measure the ambient air temperature, and the construction of it is such that it's open at the bottom, also it is open at the top. So when you heat the rod, obviously there will be air that will be flowing inside the enclosure and the air will get heated, and due to buoyancy difference it will move to the top and it will get replaced by cooler air from below. So it is very important that you keep the top and bottom open. There will be recirculation of hot air, and it will otherwise there will be a recirculation of the hot air and it will create a current inside. Then we cannot say this system as a natural convection system anymore, right? So there is no forced circulation of air around this system. It goes in, heats up, goes out, and then cooler air comes in again. So now this is the equipment. Let's see how the experiment really works. Like, what's the physics behind it, concept behind it. These are some different views of it. This is a top view, I think. These are the controls. This will show your voltmeter, ammeter readings. Here you can see, by changing this, you can see the 8 temperature thermocouple values. And then this is how you change the voltmeter, ammeter readings. This is your on-off button. This is your on-off button. So yeah, this is another view of it. Yeah. So let's see. This is a schematic representation of the rod within the enclosure. So this is the enclosure, and this is the rod. And some air current is flowing to the top as the temperature of this surface is Ts, and the surrounding air temperature is Ta, and your Ts is more than Ta, right? So let's say X starts from 0 to L, and airflow at the vicinity of the rod is hot, right? So there exists a thermal boundary layer, this one. This is not, like, I couldn't draw it that properly, but it will make you understand the concept behind it. So, so consider the flow of air at a temperature of Ta over this surface, that is at a temperature Ts. So the fluid particles in the layer adjacent to the surface will reach thermal equilibrium with the surface and assume the surface temperature Ts. And these fluid particles will then exchange energy with their adjacent, the next fluid particles, and so on. So temperature profile will develop in the flow field that ranges from Ts at the surface to your Ta that is sufficiently far from the surface. So your thermal boundary layer essentially shows the temperature variation in the direction normal to the surface. Now it starts as laminar, and then after some point it becomes turbulent, your thermal boundary layer. Now you know that the growth of turbulent boundary layer is more rapid than your thermal boundary layer. So that's how air moves in, like moves near the vicinity of the rod, any hot surface really. So this is what it looks like. So there are two things we can think about here. So let's say we think about where are we going to like how do we know where to measure the ambient temperature, like where to put the thermocouple of it? So there is one thing to think about. You think about it. So after the thermal boundary layer, of course. So this whole this is of 0.5 meter, and uh, this is your if it's less than a meter essentially. I can't exactly remember. This is less than a meter. So your thermal boundary layer will be in centimeters, of course. So you measure your air temperature after it, bulk air temperature. So another thing to think about here is your local heat, like your heat transfer coefficient, how is varies with x. So someone tell me how it should vary with x, from x starting from 0 to L, how hx should vary. Anyone?
Can anyone tell me where do you expect the H to have a maximum value at x equals 0, at x equals L, or at some point in between? Just
X
please.
equals 0.
X equals 0, fine. And then if you just think about how this from this like the largest value of H, how would it vary as you move up along X?
So it would start decreasing and then become constant towards like the bulk. At x equal to L, it would be, I mean, sort of constant.
Okay, but what the figure that I see, even though it is drawing, I can find that there is a change in the nature of the H versus X curve at according to her figure, roughly say at L by 2. Something happens from L by 2 up. What is that? It is from x equals 0 to L by 2 roughly. There's something, some specific pattern, and beyond L by 2 or whatever be that value, it has a different pattern.
So we are
So at
going from, yeah, we are going from laminar to like turbulent region. I mean, the temperature distribution would be sort of turbulent after L by 2.
Okay, what she has plotted is the thermal boundary, right? That's what you have
Yes.
plotted.
Yes,
So
sir.
she has plotted the thermal boundary layer. So the thermal boundary, the growth of the thermal boundary layer is uniform, and the rate of growth is rather small. But from some point onwards, whatever be that location, there would be disturbances, and which would be reflected on the rather fluctuations in the value of the thermal boundary layer thickness. And as you can see, it's even more pronounced in actual applications, that the rate of growth is going to be can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
We
so
can hear
there
you.
may be some problem with Ethistris connection. She will come back, but I can continue. So the rate of growth of the thermal boundary layer will increase rapidly as compared to the laminar boundary layer. So what is going, since there's going to be a lot of intermixing at higher values of Reynolds number, where the Reynolds number, you understand that for open system flows, Reynolds number is defined not on the basis of any diameter, but on axial length. So the expression for Reynolds number would be L, where L is the length times the rest of the things, dv rho by mu, so Lv rho by mu. So as the Reynolds number increases, it will slowly it will make a transition from the laminar to the turbulent flow, and the value of the heat transfer coefficient will also increase dramatically. So therefore, as you have said, that initially from a very high value of heat transfer coefficient in the region at x equals 0, it is going to gradually decrease to a value will almost become constant, because the decrease in H with axial position will be more than compensated by the additional turbulence created for larger values of Reynolds number. And then the value of H will start to grow once again, but may not be, the rate of growth is not probably going to be that sharp as you have seen during the fall of H, with X in the laminar zone. So therefore, it's not going to be a constant. It will rather rise slowly once it reaches the turbulent flow. And now you know the reason that these intermixing will increase the value of the local heat transfer coefficient. So I hope that Ithishri will be able to join, but if not, I can continue. Is that the thermocouples that you see, which are placed at different locations along the length of the rod, obviously the first one and the last one, there would be some changes because the value of H, as you understand, would be different at different places. So if I think about the local value of heat transfer coefficient and the progressively decreasing value of heat transfer coefficient as you move up along the rod, so lower value of heat transfer coefficient means in order to dissipate the same amount of heat, your temperature of the rod at that point has to be more. So your temperature should show an increasing trend with length where X, if you still recollect the figure that she has shown, if X is calculated, measured from the bottom. So at the bottom, near the bottom, the value of H is going to be large, as you have pointed out. So therefore, you need less delta T to dissipate the same heat. But as you move towards the middle and towards the up, you are in the region where the H value is decreasing because of the increase in the thickness of the boundary layer. So as the value of H is increasing, so therefore the temperature would be more. And if we could get the transition even near the top, then you are going to see almost like a constant value of H, as one of you have pointed out, that it will reach somewhat of a constant value, not exactly a constant value. In order to have the increasing trend in H, you really need very long rod, which is impracticable for an experiment. So therefore, at the top of the rod also, that this calculation you can make, you would see that the Reynolds number value is going to be less than whatever 5 into 10 to the power 5, signifying that you are still within the laminar region, though the turbulence has started to set in. So these thermocouples would give you not only the temperature profile, you can find out an average temperature as well. So the average temperature would give you the average value of the convective heat transfer coefficient for a specific value of heat input. So that's going to be your first reading. The next step in the experiment is going to be that you are going to change the amount of heat that is being supplied to the rod by changing the variac, by changing the voltage and the ampere. So now the temperature of the rod has increased, and therefore there's going to be more natural convection. The extent of natural convection will increase with an associated increase in the value of the H. So your next set of experiment would be to find next set of
Sir,
yes,
sorry, I'm back.
I was just somehow holding the fort for you.
Okay, I'm sorry for that.
It's fine. So essentially, let me just complete this and then you can continue. So essentially, you are going to change the amount of heat to be dissipated by changing the voltage and current and measuring the temperature and finding out the value of H. So we would like to see the value of H at different values of heat input. And now with history, you can take it.
Yes, sir. So I'm just saving it again. I'm sorry about that. You all can see this, right? Hello?
Yes, we can see it, but only the first slide. So you can move to the description of the, you can skip the description of the apparatus, which you have already done. I have added something. You can directly go to the table that they have to make based on the different values of Q. They will measure the temperature, find out the average and so on. This much I have covered.
Okay, sir. What is happening? Something is happening today.
It is we understand that you are in a location where the internet may not be good, so yes. I can continue and you try to rectify this problem if possible.
Right.
Otherwise, I have already explained, and I will ask for the students' opinion, or rather, if they have any questions. So the basic aim of this experiment is to find out the variation in H as a function of rod temperature. As I mentioned, by changing the value of the voltage in ampere, you can change the amount of heat that the rod is dissipating at a given at a given instant of time after it has reached steady state. So this factor is important, and as we have explained to you in our in the last week, that you find out whether or not you have reached steady state by plotting the value of temperature as a function of time. So initially you would see that the temperature will increase rapidly, then the rate will fall, and almost like asymptotically it will reach a point where it's not changing that much. So let's say it's within a span of 15 minutes, it's only changing by about 0.5 degree. So for the sake of finishing the experiment within a given time, we take that to be the steady state value. So now we have seven thermocouples whose temperatures would be known to you when it has reached steady state. So you can find out what's the average temperature, and you can find out based on the amount of heat dissipated what's the average value of the natural convection heat transfer coefficient. Since you are doing it at three different heat inputs, so you'd be able to measure or calculate what is the value of the heat transfer coefficient at these different values. Now, there are a number of relations and correlations which are available in the literature in your textbook, whichever textbook you have followed for your heat transfer course, and there you could see that whether or not your temperature change and the change of H, do they follow anything that has been prescribed in those relations. So that's another way of testing whether your experiments are being done properly. And of course, there are many. Idhisri, can you change the
Yes.
slide? No.
Sir, I can't even load the slide for some reason.
Try it again. Switch. Log out of Teams and try again.
Okay, give me.
So if you recollect what Idhisri has shown you in the beginning, like it's just a box with top and bottom open, and you have the cylinder in the middle which has thermocouple connections and connections for the electrical inputs. So it's, and the fact that we have to keep natural part of the convection intact. So many times what we see is that the students are working around it, and it's rather hot, and they have switched the ceiling fan on, which is definitely not maintaining the natural part of the convection that is the focus of this specific experiment. So you have to be careful about shutting off any of these external perturbations which can cause the deviation from the natural convection. You have to wait for sufficient amount of time for it to reach steady state, and so on. So I think that's all about the experiment. I hope that Idhisri will be able to come back and show you the figures.
Yes, sir. I'm here, but I still cannot upload it. If at all possible, can we share this with the students?
Yes.
I'll share the whole presentation.
Send it to Professor Pradhan and me, and we will send them to the students. But I think I have touched upon most of the salient features of it. The rest, you should be able to. If you have any question, definitely please ask me, and else we'll move on to the next experiment. Any question?
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, it's me, Shaptarshi.
Okay, Shaptarshi, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sir, I wanted to suggest something like I have already created a folder for day 2. Like all the TAs are uploading their presentation and manuals in the team, right? So if Idhisri ma'am wants, she can upload the manual and presentation in there.
Yes, sure. I will do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, fine. That's a better solution. But is there any fundamental question from the student side that you would like us to clarify? Okay. If not, Isisri will keep on trying to see if she can show it today.
Yes.
And the next student will please take over. The next TA, please take over after introducing yourself.
Sir, it's me. I'm
Okay,
supposed to present. Okay.
please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Let me share my screen. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Please seconds. My computer is freezing somewhat. Let me. Okay. Are you able to see my presentation, my slideshow?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So good afternoon to the respected professors and to all the students present here today. I am Saptarshi Sengupta, an MTech second year student from the Department of Chemical Engineering, IIT Kharagpur. And currently I am pursuing my master's thesis under the guidance of Professor Dasgupta. So today I'm going to talk about this experiment, which is based on dropwise and filmwise condensation. So the aim of this experiment is to determine the individual heat transfer coefficients in dropwise and filmwise condensation. So these are two specific modes of condensation that we are going to talk about a little bit in detail in this experiment. And for that we use a condensation apparatus. So the heat transfer coefficient, how it varies in both dropwise regime and filmwise regime, will help us to understand the two regimes better. So before getting into that, let us have a brief introduction of the process of condensation. So as we all know already, condensation is a natural phase change phenomenon in which matter changes from the gaseous phase to the liquid phase by the loss of heat energy. Now, condensation usually involves very high heat fluxes. This is because of the fact that a large amount of latent heat is being exchanged between the matter, between the vapor state and the surroundings. So as a result of which, since it's a natural process and has very high heat fluxes, it finds several uses in the industry, such as in the power industry. It can be used for cooling processes, in the process industry, for and also in fog harvesting. There are several other industries which extensively employ this process of condensation in various practices. Now, the two modes of condensation that we talked about previously, what are those two modes? The first is film-wise condensation. So in film-wise condensation, we have a film of liquid, condensing liquid, spreading on the surface and coating the surface. On the other hand, the other mode of condensation, known as drop-wise condensation, usually involves the liquid condensing in the form of isolated bead-like droplets. The droplets usually don't coalesce and form a film and coat the entire surface. So this is dropwise condensation. Now in the case of condensing water, usually wettable surfaces or surfaces which have a high affinity for the condensing liquids, they undergo film-wise condensation. And in the case of water, most of the surfaces available in nature are wettable. So film-wise condensation is usually more common in natural processes than drop-wise condensation, unless a surface has been artificially modified or artificially modified. Dropwise condensation is rare in natural processes, in completely natural processes. Dropwise condensation, however, is usually much more effective than filmwise condensation. This is because of the fact that dropwise condensation has much higher heat fluxes and much higher heat transfer coefficients for the surfaces. So can anyone tell me why dropwise condensation involves higher heat transfer coefficient, heat transfer rates? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes. So can anyone please answer the question that I put forth to you? That why is it that dropwise condensation usually has higher heat transfer rates?
Because it has higher surface area.
No. It's not higher surface area. It's because of the fact that in film-wise condensation, we have a film of liquid coating the surface, and that film of liquid contributes to the heat transfer resistance. So since film-wise condensation usually has a higher heat transfer resistance, the rate of heat transfer is much lower. That is the reasoning why dropwise condensation is more effective.
Shoptashi,
So
can I just interject here for a moment?
yes, sir.
Can I hear the answer which was given? Can you please repeat, the student who has given this? Can you please repeat your answer?
Sir, I just said that in dropwise condensation, the surface area for drops are more. So that may be the reason the heat transfer is more.
Okay, so there's partial truth to the answer that you have given, but what you can you I'm thinking something about your answer. Can you amplify a bit more? Why are you saying it's a number? The amount of surface is more. Surface provided is more.
Because in film condensation, the liquid drop means basically the liquid is film, so the surface area will be the less. But for droplets, the surface area will be more because it will be a individual droplets on the surface. That's why I said like that.
Okay, I would probably try to modify your statement. I mean, essentially what Shoptashi said is correct. But since you have given an answer, I'm just giving you some pointers to think about. If you think about the surface area per unit volume, okay, that's going to be the largest for the droplets. So if I take that to be the essence of your statement, then there is definitely something to think about your answer. So the surface area per unit volume between a droplet, especially when the size of the droplet is small, and the surface area available for the film, there's a definitely difference. So the heat transfer area possible for the case of a liquid droplet would be more than that in a film. So your statement is correct in from the standpoint of thinking about surface area per unit volume. This becomes even more prominent as the system size becomes smaller. So as the system size becomes smaller, the surface is going to dominate over the volume, and therefore anything that happens at the surface will be more pronounced as compared to whatever that's happening inside the in the volume, in a volumetric sense. So if you look at the left side figure that you see, the heat has to pass through the film, reach the reach the interface between the liquid and vapor, and there you are going to get, I mean, it's the condensation, so it's the other way around. So the energy released at the interface, vapor liquid interface, has to travel through the liquid, reach the cooled wall, and so on. But if you think about the others, the right hand side part of the figure, then you have a large, you do not have that much of a condensing conduction resistance as provided by the thick film. What you have are tiny droplets. So that's also helpful. So I would say that what you have said is going to be correct if you think it in that sense, from that standpoint. But grossly correct answer would be what
I don't think we can hear, sir. Can we?
So, hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, sir, you were audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
All right. So, Shaptashi, I just gave an answer. Shaptashi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Oh, I just gave an answer based on the surface area per unit volume. That's different between the droplet and the film. So for the droplet, that's a very high value, surface area per unit volume. Whereas for a film, it's rather small. So any surface effect, and we can think of condensation as a surface dominated phenomena, which will be more pronounced for the case of vapor and as compared to that of a film. So that's one way of looking at it. So whatever answer that was provided, there is some logic if you think it in from surface area per unit volume basis, and it is definitely going to be much more, I mean, more correct at the micro scale. That was my point. But I agree with the answer that you have provided.
Yes, sir.
But it needs to be supplemented by this as well, that the surface part of the process needs to be emphasized as well. Please continue.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Sure.
Okay. So we have discussed about dropwise and filmwise condensation. Now let us look into how we are going to implement that sort of condensation regime in an experiment. So this is the experimental apparatus that we are going to use, that we have used in our experiment. So the apparatus involves an electrically heated boiler or a steam generator. So this white drum that you see here, that is the heated boiler, and since it is electrically heated, we need a voltage regulator to regulate the amount of heat energy being applied. So this black knob that you see here, that is used to regulate the voltage. And since it is a steam boiler, the steam pressure must be maintained constant so that the steam flow rate remains uniform throughout the experiment. So for that we need to monitor the steam. So for that we have a steam pressure gauge added to the steam generator. And since like if the pressure decreases, if the amount of steam decreases, we need to increase the voltage to generate more steam, and if it is too high, we need to decrease the voltage, and so on. That is why we need to maintain the voltage, the steam pressure constant. The next component to the apparatus would be a glass cylinder. So these glass cylinders, here we have two different glass cylinders with two wire cooled copper condensers. So inside the copper condensing plate, there is a channel for the cooling water to pass through. So now let me present another picture. This will be much more clearer to you. Are you able to see this other picture?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you can see here that one of the condensing plates is completely made of copper. The other condensing plate that is shown here is gold plated. Now, why is it gold plated? Like as I have mentioned previously, we need to modify the surface to make this plate hydrophobic and to promote dropwise condensation on the plate. So this gold plated copper condenser is for studying the dropwise condensation regime, and this the pure copper plate is for studying the filmwise condensation regime. So this plate is for filmwise condensation, and this is for dropwise condensation. We also have a rotameter. So this is a water circulation system. The green tank that you see here, that is used to store water, and using this pump, the water is pumped into the channels inside the condensing plates. So it goes through here, and we need to monitor the flow rate of water. So for that we have two rotameters attached to the water channels. So with that we also have a pressure gauge, which I have already mentioned previously. And the last component is that of a digital thermometer or thermocouples. So we have thermocouples attached to the cooling water inlet point, the cooling water outlet points. The temperature of the steam is also measured using a thermocouple, and also we have thermocouples measuring the temperature at the center point of the two condensing plates. So these are the digital temperature indicators which are used to take our observations. So this pretty much sums up the apparatus that we are going to use. This is the procedure. So in the first step would be to fill the steam generator with water to a little over half the half volume of the boiler drum. Now, why do we do that? We do that to prevent the water level from getting too low, so that none of the heating coil inside the water heater is exposed to air or to steam. It is a heating coil meant to heat water, not steam or air. So if it is exposed to air, it might burn itself at a high voltage. So we need to ensure that the coil remains submerged throughout the entirety of our experiment. So for that we need to fill the steam generator to a little over half, to almost 3/4 of the volume. The next step would be to start the pump and allow the cooling water to flow, and we use the rotameter to measure the flow rate. Usually we use flow rates between 20 to 40 centimeter cubes per second for our experiments. And we also have a heater. We switch it on and then adjust the voltage using the voltmeter. I have already mentioned that the pressure must be regulated at around 1 kg per centimeter square. In some experiments it is also regulated at around 0.5 kg per centimeter square. So more or less it should remain constant. And then the steam is allowed to flow through the gas chamber. So when the steam flows through the gas chamber, it comes in contact with the cooled surface of the condensing plate, and then the steam condenses into water droplets and it falls down into the drainage valve, and it is drained out of the apparatus. So that is the process that is taking place inside the condensing cylinder, the glass cylinders. We maintain the pressure constant. I have already mentioned why. And then we note down the temperatures, that is the inlet and outlet temperatures for cooling water, the steam temperature, and also the center point temperature of the condensing plates. And after that we proceed for our calculations. These are some of the labels and specifications. So we have already specified the inner diameter, outer diameter, and length of the copper condenser and the gold plated condenser. So these are the various dimensions of the condensing plates. And then we have the various temperatures that we are recording. So T1 is the water inlet temperature. T2 and T4 are the center point temperatures of the copper tube and the gold plated tube respectively. We also have water temperature at the outlet of the copper tube, which is T3, and for the gold plated tube, which is T5. And finally, we have the vapor temperatures around the two tubes, that is T6 and T7. So these are the 7 temperatures that we are noting down. These are some of the observations that we have obtained by actually conducting the experiment. So we have taken observations, we have noted temperatures for 3 different flow rates, that is 20 cc per second, 30 cc per second, and 40 cc per second. And the steam pressure has been maintained at 1 kg per centimeter square. And the experiment has been repeated for both film-wise condensation regimes and drop-wise condensation regimes. Now, using these observations, let us get into some sample calculations. So let us take the observation for flow rate of 20 cc per second. So the first thing that we do is we measure the heat picked up by water. which is done using calorimetry, simple calorimetry, MCP delta T. So M is calculated by multiplying the flow rate with the density of water, that is 20 cc into 1000, that is 0.02 kgs per second. And then we calculate the heat picked up by water to be 703.42 joules per second, or 703.42 watts. Now this entire process, this entire apparatus is behaving like a heat exchanger, right? Because in the outer channel we have steam flowing outside the condensing plate, and inside the channels inside the condensing plate we have cooling water flowing, and heat is exchanged between these two fluids. So we need to calculate the log mean temperature difference, and then we use that log mean temperature difference to calculate the overall heat transfer coefficient. And we find that the overall heat transfer coefficient and the experimental heat transfer coefficient using the Newton's law of cooling, they both come out to be around 5000 watts per meter square Kelvin. So this is for drop-wise condensation. And repeating the same experiment for film-wise condensation, we observed that the heat transfer coefficients are much lower. This is pretty much in accordance with our theory, where we discussed already in detail how the overall heat transfer coefficient and the surface heat transfer coefficient for film wise condensation will be much lower than that for drop wise condensation. So this pretty much sums up our sample calculation. So basically your job, your experiment involves calculating the overall heat transfer coefficient and the surface heat transfer coefficient for all the 6 observations that we have taken, that is 3 for drop wise condensation and 3 for film wise condensation. Now these are some of the precautions. I have already mentioned that why we must maintain a fair amount of water in the steam generator already. And the next observation would be to maintain, since these are really sensitive equipments, the temperature indicators, the pressure gauges, the level controller are very sensitive equipment, so they must be handled with a lot of delicately, with a lot of delicacy. Thank you everyone for listening to me, and if you have any questions, any queries, I am ready to answer them. So does anyone have any questions? Hello? Okay, thank you.
Is there any
Hello,
other
sir.
question? Shaptarshi, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am there.
Okay. So are you done with this experiment, right? And there were no other
Yes.
questions.
Yes, sir, I am done with. Actually, I had only one experiment to present, so I am done.
Okay. Did we plan for 3 experiments to be discussed today, or?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 3 experiments.
Okay. So, Professor Pradhan,
Yes.
would you like to say something?
Okay. Today there are these 3 experiments, and then 3 more experiments will be discussed in the next class, that is on 4th October. So regarding this submission of these reports for these 3 experiments, so I will not tell you to submit before 4th, because by 30th you have to submit the report on 4 experiments that we have discussed in the last class. So these, and along with the 3 experiments that will be discussed in the next class, so maybe together we can submit before this autumn break. So maybe by 11th October we have to submit the report for all these 6 experiments. Is it okay?
So I reiterate, just for my understanding, what Professor Pradhan has said is that anyway you are submitting 4 reports on 30th, and that we have already discussed, and the remaining 6 together you are going to submit before 11th, and we'll specify a time you have to upload it in Teams. Professor Pradhan, that's what you mentioned.
Yes.
You meant, right?
Yeah.
So the students, if you have any comments? Okay, apparently you're okay with this plan. So if there are no more questions, then Professor Pradhan and I can close this class.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, and we'll meet
Excuse
again.
me, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, the last week, the coming week, we have the test week. So will it be possible to, extend the deadline for some 3 or 4 days, because the last week we won't be able to do much.
I agree, but we are giving you about 14 days time. Today is 27th, 30th, you are submitting something. So even if we think that by 30th you are going to be busy with other stuff as well as writing the reports, so from 30th till 11th, that's not a small time. And we would like you to be done with these before the autumn break starts. So that's why we are proposing that you submit it before the break, and that has prompted us to suggest 11th. Professor Pradhan, your opinion on this, sir?
Yes.
We feel that since you are not writing the procedure, etc., these reports are going to be significantly short. We are again emphasizing that it has to be done. I mean, we are going to look at your presentation and most importantly your discussion on whatever comes to your mind, how you are analyzing it, and your original comments on that.
And also calculation part is also very simple. We are showing sample calculations. We'll just follow that and we'll do calculations for rest of the data. So
It appears to us that it's not a tall task that which we are asking you. So just give it a sincere try and see what happens. Okay, so please try to submit by 11th, and if something unforeseen happens, then we can think about it. But let's have a deadline of 11th October.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
thank you.
And before we end, we would like to thank Ithistri and Shaptarshi for again an excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.